And what we'd like to do now is to invite you to hear from Sister Orla Treacy, who is a Loreto sister with 18 years experience in South Sudan. The Loretos were invited by the local bishop to open a secondary school where really there were so few even going to primary school. Sister Orla's input speaks significantly and importantly to the issue of early childhood marriage and is very informative. And despite our best efforts to catch her live, arrangements got in the better of us and we tried to change the date and then she was flying. But thanks to Renata, who are the Religious in Europe Networking Against Trafficking and Exploitation, and Anne Kelleher, the communications, who works in communications with Renata, and of course, Sister Orla herself, we have a significant video contribution that we're going to share with you in a few minutes. But before I do that, I do want to say to you that if you have a question or comment, feel free to put it into the chat, and we hope later on to have some time perhaps to be able to discuss some of your questions or answer some of your questions, or at least listen to some of the comments that you might make. We're also asking you in particular when you watch this, it's not an easy watch, shall we say, but it will be quick, even though you'll be surprised at how long it is, because Sister Orla has that knack of telling difficult stories really well, and it's quite compelling. And it's only when it's kind of finished that you'll find that there are quite a number of details that you may not have heard before. And we will learn, for example, how young girls are culturally at risk while often denied their right to education. So as you watch and as you listen to this, and if you think on the words or phrases that move you or disturb you or stay with you, we'd ask you to put them into the chat. Sister Orla has a very easy way of telling, as I said, a difficult story. So if you bear with me now, I'm just going to share this and you can watch Sister Orla tell her story from South Sudan herself. Sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Give me 1 sec again. No, just
Sudan. I hope you can see that now.
Yes.
Yeah, I am a Loreto sister. Happy to say I'm part of the same family as Imelda. And for the last 18 years, I've been in South Sudan. We were invited by the then bishop to begin a girls' boarding secondary school in an area where girls were not even going to primary school. So for the last 18 years, it's been quite an uphill battle with family, with culture, and with the community around child education, around the rights of girls for an education. So this morning, I'm just going to talk for about a half an hour and just give you some of the realities of this for us, and maybe some of the cultural context as well of what we're talking about. Sudan is in the news at the moment, but we're actually in the south now. When we came, we were part of Sudan. But in 2011, we were given our independence, and we are now the newest country in the world. We look small there. We're actually twice the size of Spain and Italy and other countries like that. We are 9 times bigger than Ireland, but we only have 11 million people in the country. And while we got independence in 2011, prior to that, we had spent most of the previous 50 years in a war with Sudan. After we got our independence in 2011, it looked hopeful and possible for South Sudan to have a peaceful future. But unfortunately, we've had our own civil wars over the last number of years since independence. So while our neighbors are fighting, we also have our own outbreaks of war. Thankfully, at the moment where I am, it's a little bit more peaceful at the moment, but things and reality can change at times. So a small country, but we actually have 64 different tribal groups. The group I'm going to talk about this morning is the group that I live with. It's the more dominant group in the country, more numerous group in the country, and that's the Dinka tribe. So in terms of the cultural practices I'm talking about, it is in reference to, in particular, to the Dinka tribe where I'm working. We do have girls from other cultural groups, but the Dinka in particular and some of the other smaller groups would be quite strong in this practice of early and forced marriage. So just to give you a different context and the language that we would use here, a girl in our culture is a girl until she marries. And that means until she marries and has a child. So technically in the culture, I am still a girl. Though I'm 51 years of age, I am still deemed to be a girl because I haven't produced a child. Polygamy is rampant. All of our men are polygamous. A man would generally have at least 3 wives. It is unusual to meet a monogamous man in this culture. And in terms of the worldview, if you have a Dinka man living in Europe, he will probably have a wife in the village as well in South Sudan, and he might have another wife in Kenya or Uganda. That's the usual practice for our men, but he might just have one living in Europe with him. Well, that's all he's allowed in Europe, let me say. We are extended families. We're a collectivist community. That is very, very important for us and very, very strong for us. The decision of educating a daughter is not just in the hands of the father. It is in the extended family. The decision for her marriage is in the hands of the extended family as well. In our culture, a girl, when she's married, her mother's family will receive, her father's family will give cows for the girl marrying. And cows are our currency. A girl can be married for 100, 150, 200, 300 cows. It can vary. Because you're educated, that does not necessarily mean you are worth more cows. In many cases, an educated girl is worth less because she would, according to the elders, she would have lost the culture. So the culture, the dowry is very, very important. And the dowry connects families. It connects the woman's family with the man's family very strongly. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Early and forced marriage for us, that's the phrase we have here. Most girls, as you and I would understand it, are forced to marry. They are verbally encouraged, and in many cases they are beaten, but generally a verbal encouragement with an extended family members tends to be enough to convince a girl. 10% of girls are married here by the age of 15. 52% of girls are married by the age of 18. So we would have girls in secondary school, and generally they come to secondary school a little bit older because of the war and because of the displacement and the lack of schools. Our average age would be 15 or 16 for a girl to come to secondary school. So she's finishing school at 20. She's already considered an old maid. And then she wants to go to university. So that's very challenging for the community, very challenging for the girl, because she's already considered old and her cow dowry is going to go down. Culture is a word we use here every day. Probably in Europe we talk about values, but here the word we use all the time is our culture, our beliefs, our worldview, our traditions, our habits. That is very, very strong for us. And I can't go an hour without somebody talking about culture. This is our culture. This is how we are. This is our way. So it's very, very strong for them. And obviously we're talking about the Dinka. So that is the tribe that we work with here. As I say, culture is one of the most significant aspects in all that we say and in all that we do. And you will see it, the girls play it out in so many different ways. And it becomes a challenge for them because education brings a Western mindset, whereas they've grown up in their own cultural, and it can often bring challenges to them and to their own situation as well. We are probably famous for all the wrong reasons in the world as well. We are the newest country in the world, that's a positive. But unfortunately, we're probably one of the most corrupt countries in the world. I think that's statistically seen. We are also one of the most uneducated countries in the world. And violence and homelessness is part of that reality for us. With 11 million people, half have been affected by displacement in the recent civil war within South Sudan. Over 2.2 million are housed in neighboring countries. So a lot of our teachers, for example, would come from other parts of South Sudan. And particularly those who came from near the border, they had a lot of trouble in 2018, 2019. Most of our South Sudanese teachers have their families now in the camps in Uganda. So displacement is part of our life, and obviously crossing the border, they become refugees as well. Within our villages, we would have people displaced from one area and shifting to another. We do a lot of tribal fighting. We do a lot of local community clashes. So you might have a community moving from county to county, or from town to village, or from village to town, depending on where the source of the fight is coming from. So this is one significant reality for us. The other reality for us is that we're hungry. I think of the 11 million, I think about 10 million would need food support, and about 6 million of those are actually dependent on foreign organizations. Now, we're dependent on foreign organizations, but we don't like them. Because while we know we need the support, we don't like reliance. We don't like to be dependent on others. So there's a bit of a contradiction in many ways as to how we practice and how we see things. Inflation is spiraling every day. If I can tell you that in December, I could change $1 American for £1,000. Yesterday, I changed $1 American for £3,000. I don't even know what the inflation rate of that is, 200 or more, I don't know. That's 5 months. The government salaries are not changing. So people are not able to feed their families with the funds that they get. So we don't rely on cash, really, we rely on our animals. Cows are our currency. Our goats are used as a means of barter and a means of exchange to get cash for other goods. And girls are the currency. Girls are the cows for the family. A woman with 4 daughters and 2 sons is blessed. Obviously, she needs sons because sons have the rights of the men, but she particularly wants a lot of daughters, and an extended family wants the blessings of many daughters so that they can have many cows. The challenge for us is because we're poor and in war, the girls become more vulnerable and they're married off earlier, and it becomes more difficult for the girls to be sustained in school or for a girl to try and dream of her own path. We have agricultural land. 50% of our land is arable, but we only actually farm on 4% of it. And this is, I would say, due to our lack of education. We struggle, we just live hand to mouth, day to day, because of our history of war. It's very difficult for us to plan for the future. We just think of what we can have today. In the country, we are one of the most illiterate countries in the world. I think 27% of us are literate. None of my generation in this area are literate because they would have all have grown up in the war. 27%, I would say, is generous, and it's probably urban-based. In the villages, I would say it's much less than that. Young generation are now getting a chance to be educated, but that would depend on where they're living and what access they have to education. Most of our teachers in primary school have only finished primary school, and that's poorly finished primary school. In a recent exam by the state government for primary school teachers, they gave them a primary school test to primary school teachers. Most of the teachers failed the primary school exam. So it's like a ripple effect, the bad teaching the bad, and there's no sense of, well, how can we change it? And how can we bring quality education when we don't have quality teachers to help the next generation? So unfortunately, we have a lot of young men and young women who feel they're educated, but have actually missed a lot of the opportunities of education, which actually makes them more difficult because they feel that sense that they should be educated, and they struggle then because they're not employable. The foreign NGOs won't employ them, which then brings a lot of resentment against the foreigners, and that continues as well. So our big reality is the one of early and forced marriage. This has been our constant challenge and our constant issue. Our school is a boarding school for girls. Today we have 383 girls in the boarding school, and it has been difficult over the years to protect them. Each girl represents cows to her family. And the father may agree for the girl to go to school, but his family, extended family, may not agree. So over the years, his extended family can come to the school looking for the girl. And when we say no, they will come aggressively and try and get the girl out. It has been a long and difficult struggle with it. A girl is married based on her beauty. So height, weight, she needs to be strong. She needs to be strong to produce a lot of children and to be able to do the domestic work at home. That's how she's valued. This is one of our more successful cases, I'm happy to say. This is Mary. Mary came to us in first year. She was 16 when she came. And Mary's family, from the beginning, the first time Mary went home for holidays after 3 months in boarding school, Mary went home and the family was organizing her wedding. She was very resilient and very courageous and started fighting her family for her right to be educated. She was beaten. She was locked up. She escaped. She was beaten. She was locked up. It continued over a number of weeks until she finally escaped back into school. And she spent the next 3 years living with us before her family finally came to the point of realizing that she would not be accepting a marriage. Thankfully, she has survived it. She finished her secondary school. She has gone on to complete her internship with us, and she has now just applied to study law in Kenya, where she hopes that she can continue the work of supporting young women. She has become a great advocate for our younger students and a great support to our younger students. But she had the strength to fight them. And I think this is the important thing. Some of the girls, when they come to us, they go home for holidays. The families are talking about they're talking about forced marriage. The girl realizes that if she chooses education, she has to walk a path alone and away from her family. That is emotionally very difficult for a lot of the girls, particularly when they're 15 years of age or 16 years of age. It's also very difficult for a girl to say no when she's surrounded by her 10 uncles and a stick, and many sticks. So this is the reality many of the girls would face in it all. Our mothers would also be very supportive in some cases. But ironically, some of the mothers are the ones also organizing their daughters' weddings. Because what happens in our culture is when a man has his eye on a girl and wants to marry a girl, he will start to buy gifts for the mother. And he will start to say to the mother, you know, your daughter is very beautiful and I would like her, and he will start to support the mother. And obviously the mother is not educated. The mother sees the value in the girl. He's a nice man. He's going to support her. But the man will only support the mother as long as he is courting the girl. Once he marries the girl, his support for the mother stops. So this is one of the challenges we have in trying to talk to our own mothers. Though they see their job is to create a good marriage for their daughter. That is the most important job for a mother. So this is one of our mothers. She's actually working with us now. She had 6 children with us in school. They were boys and girls in the primary school. Her husband is a polygamist with many wives. And when the husband discovered that the children were in school, he got very aggressive. He burnt their uniforms, he burnt their books, and he beat the mother up. When he prevented all of the children from going to school, when he went to visit another of his wives, the children started coming back to school. But as primary school's children, they used to have to hide their school bags in my office, because they knew that if the father saw them going home in a uniform with their books, they'd never be allowed to go back the next day. So this continued on for a number of months. And he came back again and realized they were going back to school again. And the same thing again, he beat the mother. He actually had the mother arrested in the local court. And the mother was finally taken to the main prison because she was disrespectful to her husband. The husband had said his children should not be going to school, and she did not respect his decision. So he brought her to the main prison and had her arrested for a number of weeks. We intervened, we got the local chiefs, and thankfully over the years, the local chiefs now understand what we're trying to do, and some of them are now supportive of what we do. We got the local chiefs involved, and the local chiefs tried to make a way with him. So in the end, it was decided that the 3 girls could continue with their education, but the 3 boys could not. The 3 boys would have to learn the cattle, would have to stay with the animals, and would not be allowed an education. The 3 girls were allowed an education, but it's the same scenario that keeps getting played out. Their last holiday, the girls went home, and the same thing, the father threatened to take them out of school. Thankfully, the eldest daughter is now in Kenya studying in university, and the other 2 girls are actually in the compound with us. Though they live across the road from us, it is difficult at times for them to stay at home. They have to escape back into the school. So some parents are ready to sacrifice everything for their children. Some parents haven't yet got that sense of the value of what it means to educate their child. The issue is, as I said, the women have grown up with the idea that their job is to be married, to bring pride to their family. So to get a lot of cows and to support their family. That's how girls have been brought up. Every girl wants to become a mother. Every girl wants to have her children, and every girl wants to make her family proud and wants to make her family feel her support. Now, when she goes into a Western education, she learns other values that will challenge that. Some of them can sustain it. many of them cannot sustain it. And as I said, it means if they're going to fight it, it means that they're going to be beaten, it means that they're going to be ostracized from their families, and it means that they're going to have to walk alone. A number of years ago, as we were trying to develop this practice of safety for the girls, we actually came up with a family contract where we asked the parents, the father in particular, to sign that the girl would not be forced out of school under any circumstance. It is valid. The government is now recognizing this, and the government has now said in our state that they recognize the girl's right to be educated. So this contract agreement we have with the family will support the girl for the 4 years in secondary school with us. But the day she leaves secondary school, we have no way to support her. And this happened very recently where one of the politicians was trying to marry one of the girls. The marriage ceremony took place 2 years ago in her absence. 150 cows were paid for her. She stayed in school, she heard about it, and she refused to go home. She eventually contacted the mother's family, and the mother's family tried their best to support her, but the mother's family has no say in the matter. We managed to get her passport, we managed to get her a ticket, and we managed to get an uncle of hers on the mother's side to get her out of the country. But the case is still pending. We've been brought to court twice already because the day she finished in Loreto, we lost all legal right to support her. And though she is now 18 years of age, the family does not consider her an adult, and they do not consider her with a right to a decision. Thankfully, the governor is a friend of ours at the moment because governors keep changing. And at the moment, he has agreed to support her, at least our right to support her, let me say. And the judge, when the case was brought to court, the father's family argued that the girl was kidnapped. The mother was in court to say the girl was not kidnapped, that she had traveled with the mother's permission. And the argument pursued whether the mother had the right or whether the father had the right and the father's family had the right. So in the end, thankfully, a very enlightened judge said, well, if the mother knew where the girl was, you can't say that the girl was kidnapped. At the moment, the girl is free. She's in Kenya. She's about to start her studies, but we expect the case will come back to us in the next 2 or 3 months from that extended family. So the issues continue, and it is not easy. This is how we kind of look at it in the decision making. The mother is on the left with her family. She has nothing to say. The mother has no say in this. It is all about the father. And remember what happens here. When the father got married with his 150 cows, he did not have 150 cows. He got cows from his uncles. He got cows from his friends. He got cows from his colleagues in work. And he got cows from his brothers, the girl's paternal uncles. Anybody who paid a cow is allowed to have a say in the girl's future. Because what happens is they all helped the father get the 150 cows to marry the mother. The mother's children are now the property of the father's family. And all of those men expect to get their cows back. So if the girl is 16 years of age and she's in school with us, and let's say the father's brother had given 10 cows for the wedding, he will come to the father and say, I want you to marry off your daughter because I want my 10 cows back because I want another wife. That man can decide to force the father to take the girl out of school, unless he has his own means, which most men don't have. They are always relying on the extended family. They're always relying on the collectivist, which is why the agreement is very important for us, because we are putting it back on the father to take responsibility. And the government is now recognizing that the father is the sole decision maker for the girl while she's in school. When she finishes school, that is when the extended family can actually make their move and their arguments too. But it's difficult, and it's a continual battle that we would have, and we regularly have guns at the gate, and we regularly have disputes, and we are regularly in trouble with all of it. So I don't know, maybe I just go back here for one more second and just remind you of some of these points as well. We are collectivist, so that's where everybody is involved. Cows are important to us. Culture is extremely important to us, and children do belong to the extended family. They do not belong to the mother or the father. Once the mother marries, she is the property of the father and his family. If he dies, she's inherited by his family to another man, where she'll produce children for the dead man. So maybe his brother will be brought in to produce children with the woman in order that she will produce children. So for us, children, wives, cows are the most important thing in our culture as well. I think that's what I'm going to say for the moment. I know there are many things and questions, and it's probably a different reality for many people, but I don't know if I can ask some questions.
We'll leave it at that just there for the minute. That was pretty much the last seconds of the video that Orla had shared with us. It's, you know, there's an awful lot in it. And we did say at the beginning when you were watching this that maybe to look out for what it is that disturbs you, what is it that moves you, what stays with you having watched that. I know I've watched it 5 or 6 times, and even watching it there again in the last few minutes, there are more things that come to mind. And like I could reference the whole lot of it. I know Orla herself even doubled back and referenced certain things like collectivist, but there were some phrases that really struck me. Things like, imagine a girl dreaming of her own path. I mean, that phrase really caught me, that she can't, and that it's not up to her, that she has no say in it. Or that if she chooses education, she chooses to walk a path alone. And alone it actually will be. And even the way a suitor might pursue the mother by lavishing gifts on the mother as a way of getting himself involved in the family. I listened to Father Edward talk about advocacy at the UN and using the UN mechanisms. And as I listened to Orla describe the reality on the ground for so many girls in South Sudan, I began to hear of some of the successes that she had, where we could see some of the advocacy paying dividends locally, where all of a sudden we could see some girls were actually achieving. There was some success. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. And even at that, we know that she had referenced some cases coming back again and again and again. She referenced the ability to be able to mind children and they're really young women because they do start school that bit later, but she referenced the ability of the school to be able to mind them up until the day they leave school, which reminds us of the whole concept of schools of sanctuary. The whole collectivist idea, that diagram at the end that really looks at the patriarchy of the whole system and looks at the city. Like Edward was the person who pointed out to us that, you know, this doesn't get much air. And perhaps that's because it is a women's issue. And if you look at the diagram that Orla showed at the very end, and you looked at the influence that women have in the whole picture, whether it's the mother or even the mother's family or the girl herself, their opinion is diminished to a tiny view, an almost unacceptable view when you look at others like the father and the brothers and the friends even, and so the collectivist community and those, the extended family making decisions. Early childhood marriage is a huge problem in South Sudan. Edward mentioned also the lack of information as being one of the challenges, that it's difficult to get accurate information. In South Sudan, they accept that there are greater than 60,000 young women suffering with obstetric fistula. They think that number is on the low end, and they put that directly down to early childhood marriage or teenage pregnancies, where girls were just not developed. Also, it's a case too that they find that where Sister Orla referenced poor education, and a country that is war-torn and in conflict and very, very poor with a huge number of displaced people, there is no midwifery. There is very little care for young mothers. There is birth in isolation. There is conflict. There is a very poor health infrastructure. So the outlook for these young women is not good. So what we're looking to do, I suppose, is to look at the bright star that is Sister Orla and her work in South Sudan. There was so much stayed with me from that, but I know Tony too would probably have a number of things that she might reference. And you too, when you are watching it and having seen it, and you will get a chance to see this again, because we will send you the recording to everybody who is online and to those who couldn't make it this evening. So you will get a chance to see this again. And when you watch it back, there is more to hear. Each time you watch it, you will learn a little bit more. It is quite arresting, really, to be honest, quite upsetting in a lot of ways. Tony, I might hand over to you before we move on, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've said pretty much most of what we get from that video. Again, that's about the third time I've watched it, and each time I am just numbed, I guess, at that the realities that the young women and girls are facing on a daily basis. I mean, the fear of what did she say, being beaten into marriage, that children, wives, cows are the local currency. You know, all I talked about, you know, having to pay £2,000 for a dollar. So people don't use currency other than cows and girls. And that a mother's job is to create a good marrying daughter. I think what was important too, what you mentioned there, was around displaced people. And that mostly I expect in that case that women and girls would be delivering on the move. I just had a quick look there at the statistics around the number of physicians per 1,000 people of the population, and it's the 0.04, and there are 0.4 nurses or midwives per 1,000 people. And another key indicator is the maternal mortality per 100,000 live births is 3,800. So with limited or no access to healthcare, there is not a safe birth for all women in South Sudan, and there clearly won't be access to fistula repair. And we don't have the statistics. We don't know how. You know, I mean, you mentioned a statistic there, but how can you possibly gather information of people on the move? And the other thing is that, you know, this is 11 million people. Half of those are women and girls. But I think that the one thing that struck me as a positive in the work that Orla is doing and the Loreto sisters is that family contract as a way of trying to prevent obstetric fistula and maternal mortality, but also trying to protect young girls. It's kind of a powerful prevention program. So I think that is kind of the you know, what came out mostly from myself, alongside what you had said, Brian, too.